We hold these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
As a member of Congress, I get to have a lot of really interesting people in the office. Experts on what they're talking about.
This is the podcast
for insights into the issues.
China, bioterrorism, Medicare for all. In-depth discussions.
Breaking it down into simple terms. We hold these truths.
We hold these truths.
With Dan Crenshaw.
The Eagle has landed.
So I'm here with Chairman Ajit Pai. You are chairman of the FCC, and thank you for coming, by the way. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
So I'll tell the audience a little bit about you really quick. You were the son of immigrants from India, but you grew up in Kansas. You went to Harvard for your undergrad. Nobody's ever heard of that, so who cares? And the University of Chicago School of Law to get your law degree, I presume. And
didn't go there for the weather, I can tell you that.
Yeah, why? It's weather very windy and cold. But although Boston is not much different. So you were appointed FCC commissioner by President Obama and then selected as chairman by President Trump. You've worked for the Department of Justice, a lawyer for the telecom industry, the Senate Judiciary Committee. You first joined the FCC in 2007. And you've been working there for several years as a counsel and then you returned to private practice in 2011. And I assume at that point you were appointed as commissioner. What is the difference between commissioner and chairman?
It's a big difference. Every chairman is also a commissioner. There are 5 commissioners of the FCC, but in terms of the functions, it's vastly different. Every now and then I think back to when I was a commissioner and you don't set the agenda. Yeah. You don't oversee all of the agency's 1,400 staff. So it's a much more challenging job being in this corner office.
You're a big deal now. You're a bigger deal now than before. That's what people need to know.
Yeah, for better or worse, it's a much more prominent position.
So what's the FCC?
So the Federal Communications Commission, great question, was set up in 1934 by Congress to oversee the communications industry. And over the years, it's changed a lot. Back in the early days, it was to regulate AM radio and FM radio, to get TV up and running. Now it's satellite, cable, the internet, things like that.
Okay. It's a big job. So, I'm a millennial. I'm an elder millennial. So I have sort of a foot in the kind of Gen X generation and a foot in the millennial generation. I grew up without computers and internet, but I still had them at a fairly young age. And so it's kind of an interesting place that I'm in. And I know a lot of my fellow millennials, and to include Gen Xers probably, we care about innovation, right? We want everything on our phones. I want my healthcare on my phone. I want to see my doctor through my phone. I want to order my food on my phone. Everything is surrounding this sort of innovative capacity. The gig economy is something we all like quite a bit. Want the ability to own our own labor and sell it and not have people get in the way. So what is the FCC's role in that? And how do you guys see innovation? What are you excited about, and how do you regulate it and make sure that it isn't hindered by overregulation?
It's an excellent point. So we see our role as twofold. We want to put in place the building blocks for entrepreneurs to be able to innovate, whether it's the airwaves that wireless entrepreneurs want to use, whether it's the optical fiber that allows the building of next generation broadband networks. That's one piece of it. And the other piece of it is from a consumer's perspective. We're always trying to think about where do consumers want to use this connectivity? It could be telemedicine or precision agriculture, online education or gaming. We essentially want American citizens to take charge of their own future. And increasingly in the 21st century, that means access to what I call digital opportunity. So making sure that every American has access to these technologies is a really important job for us.
Yeah. And what about memes?
Memes.
Are memes part of this innovation?
They have not yet been, although I do tend to use them myself on Twitter, and I've certainly been the recipient of many of them the last couple of years. So.
Yeah, they're a hoot, aren't they?
It's sort of weird, isn't it, when you get friends from grade school sending you a meme like, hey, I just saw you on the internet.
What's your favorite meme of yourself?
Oh, my God. So there's one.
What's your least favorite and favorite?
My most favorite, which my staff won't let me put on my Twitter account, some guy came up with a caricature of me. Yeah. I know, this job would be
Lighten
great.
Up, guys.
Yeah. But some guy came up with a meme of me as Darth Maul from the Star Wars films. I have bright orange skin. I've got these horns coming out of my head, but I'm still wearing a suit, some sort of civilized looking, and
civilized,
talking about how I'm about to destroy the internet and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So that was one of my favorite.
Oh yeah, destroy the internet. And I want to get to that in a second because that involves probably your stance on net neutrality,
right,
generally speaking. So we want to illuminate that for the viewers because it's not as simple as being for free internet or against free internet. And this ties into the innovation discussion quite a bit. But before we get to net neutrality, I want to zero in on innovation. And I guess my question is, what generally works and what doesn't? I mean, how can we, listen, I'm a Republican. I'm a very conservative Republican. It doesn't mean I'm an anarchist. Mm-hmm. Okay, I believe in some government regulation, but I believe in the right touch of government regulation. So, I mean, can you explain what that looks like? What's the philosophy? That's
exactly right. Setting the broad contours for competition and innovation, and then letting the private sector innovate. So for many years before I got into office, what was in vogue at the FCC across Republican and Democratic administrations was to pick out particular technologies or particular companies or just sectors of the economy and specifically encourage them to get a leg up in the marketplace. And one of the things that we've tried to do over the last couple of years is to say, we don't pretend to have a monopoly on wisdom. 3 bureaucrats out of 5 at the FCC should not be setting policy for hundreds of millions of American consumers. And so instead what we say is, let's let all of the technologies, all of these companies have a full and fair chance to compete, and let the aggregated decisions by consumers across the country decide who wins and who doesn't.
Yeah, because there's a knowledge problem, right? I mean, you sort of mentioned this. There's 5 people. How can you possibly have the knowledge of the market? And I, you've been in the bureaucracy for a while now. And is this a broader problem, not just with the FCC, but this general belief that a small group of people can actually have the proper amount of knowledge and essentially omniscience to properly regulate, pick winners and losers, and and drive the market for where it needs to be, especially with something as dynamic as technology.
Absolutely right. And you probably see this in Congress a lot, but it's difficult to do because there's always going to be somebody who comes to Congress and says, hey, you know what? If you give me the keys to the kingdom, we will deliver incredible value and we'll give you all the credit for it. But that necessarily means shutting out everybody else from the marketplace. That's not what we want to do. So whether it is encouraging electric utilities to get into the broadband game through our funding program, whether it's encouraging innovation in space, we've been the first FCC to approve low Earth orbit satellites to get into the internet access game, getting more unlicensed spectrum out there for Wi-Fi innovators to use without having to come beg for approval from the FCC.
Right.
We want everyone to enter this marketplace and compete. That is ultimately when consumers are better off. It's not always an easy case to make, but we're determined to make it.
What people don't realize either is that the ones making the biggest case for more regulation tend to be the biggest companies. Is that something you see quite a bit?
I cannot even begin. I mean, I don't know how long this podcast is, but we could give you
as long as we want. Yeah.
It's incredible. And that's one of the things that I think Americans need to understand is that heavy-handed regulation tends to benefit the bigger companies the most. They're the ones that can throw a fleet of lawyers or a bunch of accountants or a bunch of compliance officers at the problem. It's those smaller entrepreneurs who don't have the resources to figure out what the FCC thinks about this or that issue. Those are the folks.
And you said you had at least a bunch of examples. So let's go with 1 or 2.
Oh my gosh, so many of them. So, I mean, we saw this in the context of net neutrality, that some of the bigger companies, a couple of them said, well, okay, we can live with these regulations, but you didn't hear from, say, Paladin Wireless in Royston, Georgia, or Aristotle Wireless in Little Rock, Arkansas. I talked to some of these smaller companies. Yeah. They said, look, the same person who's building these networks is the person who's handling the customer service calls, is the same person who's going to have to file these reports to the FCC. We have limited resources here. And literally every dollar we have to divert to Washington-based compliance is a dollar that does not go to connecting our customers with.
And is there a tendency in the, let's call it the bureaucratic state or the administrative state or the executive branch, it's all really the same thing. Is there a tendency to, this is my take on it, and I saw it a little bit in the military as well, which is, listen, you give us a mission. So our goal every single day is to add new things to that mission. And so it doesn't come with ill intent, right? This natural tendency to overregulate. But it's also not surprising given human nature. You put people in charge of regulating something, and it's and it seems that the federal agencies in charge of these things, at no point do they think, well, I think we're done regulating. Let's just monitor. Yeah, it doesn't ever seem to be the case. They're always looking for new reasons to add a new rule here and there, and maybe it's well intentioned, and maybe it's even the right thing to do. I'm not saying it's not. But it just adds to this complex web where, again, the big companies can figure it out and small companies can't. And, it sort of chips away at the overall, innovative capacity of the market and ability to enter the market. I mean, is that fairly accurate?
I think there is something to that. And a close cousin to that would be the fact that the most powerful force in government, at least in my view, from the administrative state's perspective, is inertia, that rules that are on the books remain on the books simply because they've always been on the books, even if the marketplace has changed a lot. So we hear from broadcast radio companies all the time, for example, look, we're now competing against Pandora and Spotify and Google and Facebook and podcasts and all these things are melded together. But the FCC's regulations still presume that we're the only game in town when it comes to audio entertainment. That's just not the case anymore. And so you should get rid of some of these regulations. And for many years, they were hitting a brick wall. But I approach it as somebody who embraces technology and dynamic change. And we want our rules to reflect where the marketplace is, not where it was in 1975.
Right. And so speaking of using older regulations to I guess implement new policy, let's talk about net neutrality.
Yeah. When
you hear the words net neutrality, that sounds like something we should all be in favor of.
That's a fantastic marketing slogan.
I mean, yeah, I'll give it to the Democrats. They're very good at this. But it's not exactly a debate between free internet and not free internet, is it? I mean, so just tell us what they mean when they're talking about net neutrality.
It's difficult to say because what they mean changes depending on what type of argument they're trying to advance. But the basic question is, how do you want the FCC to regulate the internet? Do you want it to be regulated like a slow-moving utility? Do you want it to be as fast as Amtrak, as innovative as your post office, as popular as your DMV? Or do you want it to be a more market-based approach? Now, to President Clinton's credit, back in the 1990s, he and a Republican Congress decided we're going to take option 2, the market-based approach. We're not going to treat it like Ma Bell, the telephone companies. And as a result of that decision, from 1996 until 2015, we saw the internet explode. I mean, it's hard for people to remember because we live in the day-to-day, but because of that decision, companies were able to innovate without seeking government permission. And the internet economy in the United States became the envy of the world. And so to me, at least in 2015, when these heavy-handed utility-style regulations were put in place, there was no problem to solve. It was more a political decision.
And that's because they chose to regulate it under different provision. Can you explain that?
Exactly. So historically, it had been regulated under what's called Title I of the Communications Act, a more market-based approach. The advocates in the 2015 decided, nope, we want it to be regulated under Title II of the Communications Act. And Title II was developed in 1934 to regulate Ma Bell, the AT&T telephone monopoly.
Yeah.
And so whether or not you were a big company like a Comcast or Verizon or a small company like Paladin Wireless or Aristotle, you were going to face the same onslaught of Title II regulations. And to me, at least, that was the wrong way to go. I mean, there's a bad apple in the bunch, single out that bad apple, but don't presume that every apple in the barrel is a bad one. And we saw the results of that decision in the subsequent 2 years as infrastructure investment went down.
Don't regulate by anecdote.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, a broader problem in the regulatory environment, right? You see a problem, you can tell a really compelling story about it. It was so unfair, it was wrong, it was unjust, so we got to revolutionize the whole system. And I think that speaks to a real problem with gratitude and educating ourselves on why things worked in the first place. You know, there's this real tendency in today's America to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? To you want to keep reaching higher. Right. And so let's look at it like you stacked a bunch of boxes to keep reaching higher towards innovation. And then people are mad because you can't quite reach that next level. So you want to undercut all the boxes that you're standing on. I mean, it's the three-legged stool argument. And it's very frustrating to watch. That's just my general observation anyway.
But especially in this space, I mean, if you look at the folks who really pioneered some of the innovations, I mean, every single person now is walking around with one of these smartphones. That is because of the amazing decisions and innovations that were pioneered by people flying by the seat of their pants in the early days of wireless. I mean, it wasn't the government that sat there and decided, okay, this is how wireless technologies are going to work. This is how LTE is going to be deployed.
Yeah.
Companies and individuals had to do that over time. And these networks don't have to be built and these innovations don't have to happen. It's private initiative that makes it work.
It always is. And but going back to net neutrality, then let's steelman the other side's argument. What problems did they see that they wanted fixed in 2015?
So you can look in the hundreds of pages of that decision in 2015, and you will not find any concrete evidence of market failure. They will come up with a case out of 2005 out of North Carolina involving an internet service provider, very few, if any, have heard of. They'll come up with another case in 2009, but there was no market failure justifying the onslaught of these regulations. Now, what that order does say is, well, internet service providers could do this, or they could do that. And, to me at least,
it's always assume the worst about the private sector.
Exactly. And so especially in a sector as dynamic and ever-changing as the internet, the last thing we want to do is essentially block off potential the marketplace to say, okay, this is how the internet's going to be forevermore, and we're going to regulate it accordingly.
It's just strange. I've always wondered why this became such a rallying cry from the Democratic Party. It's sometimes I get it, right? Like sometimes I look at what they want to do. I think the way they want to do it is wrong, but at least I understand the direction they want to go. Let's say healthcare, for instance. All right. I think the way they want to get to healthcare for everybody is wrong, but at least I understand the end goal.
Right.
Okay. That makes sense to me. Of course. I think we all want that, but this one really doesn't. And I never saw the purpose in cloaking this new regulatory environment as internet freedom when it's actually completely the opposite.
And I couldn't agree more. And what's been especially disappointing is some of the misinformation that was out there that has led many people, especially those under the age of 30, to think that the internet really was at stake. It might not work if we made this. It's incredible to me. It just
they're playing to the exact audience that effectively I started out with, right? The millennials want more innovation. How do we get there?
Yeah.
And the Democrats were quick to say, well, the internet's under threat.
Yeah.
There's always this false premise, right? To justify extreme regulation, you need some kind of extreme premise. The world's ending in 12 years, so we need to have only wind and solar. Everybody, we're dying on the streets. We need Medicare for all. The internet is at stake. We need net neutrality. And and people say, oh, well, God, the internet's at stake. What are you going to do about it, Republicans? And we're like, hold on. We actually disagree with the premise here.
Yeah.
The internet's been working pretty well for quite a while, and here's all the proof.
But it's incredible, at least in December of 2017, when we made this decision, there were a precious few who had occupied the public square who even wanted to hear the other side of the debate. I mean, it's just, if you'd told me 10 years ago, everyone from Bette Midler to politicians are going to be hate tweeting you about issue as arcane as Title I versus Title II telecom regulation, it's surreal, but that's the situation we're in.
Right.
But I'm glad to say that as a result of our decision now, speeds are up over 60% since we made our decision on average for fixed broadband. Infrastructure investment is up. And as you pointed out, that issue has receded, I think in part because people have come to realize, wow, you know what? Maybe we were sold a bill of goods. The internet hasn't ended. It's not going to work one word at a time, as the Senate Democratic Caucus Twitter account put it in February of 2018. We don't have to pay $5 per tweet. Mm-hmm. And it's amazing to see when I do these college campus town halls now that students, I think, have a more nuanced view of things. That, we shouldn't have listened to these tales of woe from politicians trying to peddle something.
What do you think about, so there was some bipartisan legislation that would sort of take some of the goals of net neutrality, like limiting throttling, for instance. I'll let you explain exactly what they are, because I don't want to do an injustice to what the terms were. But can you get into that for a second and say what, because there are some things in net neutrality that they claim they wanted to prevent, and we actually didn't disagree with. It was just the way they wanted to do it was just wrong.
So this is the dirty little secret about this issue, and I'm only going to let you know, so don't tell anybody.
Okay.
This issue could be solved.
Stop recording. Just kidding.
This issue could be solved with a one-page bill that would get 99% of support of Republicans and Democrats in Congress. No blocking of lawful content on the internet, no throttling of content, no anti-competitive paid prioritization, transparency. Every internet service provider has to disclose how it does business. I mean, I've just described a bill that very few people could reasonably oppose.
Yeah.
What the problem is that certain politicians are so wedded to Title II in particular because they want all of the regulations that come along with that.
Right.
And that is very backward looking. I mean, this is 85 years ago now we're talking about these regulations being developed.
They really want to regulate that internet just like we regulated phone companies in the 1930s. I can't explain why, but that's really what they want to do.
And it's incredible. Would anyone say that landline telephones are as innovative as wireless phones? It just doesn't. But part of the reason is that we had a very different regulatory regime over the years.
Yeah. I mean, most millennials don't even have landline phones. We don't like the calls that come in. Speaking of which, are you guys doing anything to limit robocalls?
Oh, it's a number one consumer protection priority. This drives me crazy. I got one today, actually. And
really?
Yeah, every now and then I just play along and answer just to see what's going to happen.
that too.
It's just great. But so we've been pulling out all the stops on the regulatory side, making it easier for companies to block spoofed calls. We've demanded that the phone industry adopt what's called a caller ID authentication framework, essentially authenticating every phone number. Okay. And on the back end, we've been going after robocallers through enforcement actions. But this is a problem that this is actually not net neutrality. This is the number one category of consumer complaints we've gotten for years. Yeah. And so we're really going after some of these folks as hard as we can.
Great. Good deal. So innovation's going up, investment in infrastructure is going up. You said the internet's faster than it used to be.
Yeah.
Robocalls are going down. Okay, what about 5G? Where are we at on 5G, and what does that look like for America?
So we're doing well. 5G, as your listeners probably know, is the next generation of wireless connectivity. They're probably familiar with 4G LTE. 5G, if anything, is going to be even better. 100 times faster speeds, much lower latency, which is the responsiveness of the network. And it's going to enable applications, some of which we can't even dream of. Artificial intelligence, virtual reality, all those things.
Flying cars?
Maybe if you're a fan of Back to the Future.
I've heard of what Uber is doing with some of this. So,
it sounds crazy, but who knows? I mean, 10 years ago, people thought you'd be crazy for saying driverless cars. And here we are. So, but so at the FCC, we've adopted something called the 5G Fast Plan, which folks can find at fcc.gov/5G. And essentially involves getting more airwaves out there, a spectrum for companies to use, and also more infrastructure, wireless infrastructure and fiber to carry that wireless traffic. The early indicators are good. We're making progress, but part of the issue is that there are other countries, China in particular, that really want to take the lead in 5G. They saw that the success we had in 4G, and they want to claim that success for themselves. So it's really been a pitched battle so far.
How are you involved in the issues surrounding China and Huawei and ZTE as we try to limit their investment, because there's potential national security concerns, but frankly, just economic security concerns as well. So can you talk about that for a second?
Definitely. This is something we take seriously, and the FCC has a front row seat at that table. In fact, about a year ago, I proposed to ban the use of FCC funding from being spent by recipients here in the United States on any equipment or services that might present a national security threat. And on November 22nd, the FCC will be voting on my plan to formally bar them from spending that money on companies like Huawei and ZTE. And to me, at least, given how transformative 5G is going to be, it's going to power our industries, it's going to light up our appliances and devices. We don't want to think about security as an afterthought. We can't take a risk and hope for the best. And especially to the extent the Chinese government has made clear recently that they're willing to use their leverage over things like basketball and Taiwanese flag emojis. When it comes to our 5G networks, some of which might be near sensitive installations, we cannot take a risk like that.
What do you, with trade relations with China the way they are right now, what do you see in the technology space happening?
Part of the problem is the Chinese don't play by the same rules we do. They pick national champions, in this case, Huawei and ZTE. They subsidize those champions when those the companies are bidding on contracts in foreign countries. There are also, the Department of Justice has announced numerous cases in which they have stolen our intellectual property and incorporated that into their own companies. And so in many cases, they don't play fairly in the sandbox, so to speak. And from our perspective, at least, we're not saying this to advance our own domestic competitors. In fact, there is no U.S.-based supplier like Huawei or ZTE. It's pretty much just Ericsson, Nokia, and Samsung, two European and one Asian competitor. And so our position is simply, there's too much of a security risk here. And I know there are larger trade issues going on, but I'm focused like a laser beam on security. I mean, if security of our networks cannot be ensured, there's no way to proceed. That's the base level expectation every American citizen should have.
But do you worry that some of our telecom companies, do you worry that their supply chains are very deeply intertwined into the Asian market? What do you see there?
I do worry, and that's why looking forward, at least, we've banned the use of that funding as I described, but we're also looking backward to see if they've incorporated any Huawei or ZTE gear in their networks already, and to see how we can finance the removal of that equipment. The other thing, we don't have jurisdiction over companies that do business abroad, but one of the things I have pointed out is that some of the same companies, especially the Silicon Valley companies, have been advocating for internet openness here in the United States. They should think about how they do business in China. For example, constructing a search engine that doesn't allow Chinese citizens to access certain terms like Tiananmen Square, or Apple, for example, removing the Taiwanese flag emoji from iOS devices. I mean, those are the kinds of things that, as somebody who cherishes free speech, not just as a constitutional guarantee, but as a cultural value, that's something that's really important to me.
One thing we talk a lot about, and I think it's a bipartisan concern, is the rural areas and how they get access to broadband and 5G and all the wonderful things that we have in the city, although I would argue that oftentimes I don't have great coverage in the city, but that's fine. What are you doing about that?
We're working on it.
Yeah.
We're working on it.
But when we say that, I don't think everybody understands what we mean. Can you explain, what would it mean to actually improve capabilities in the rural areas of America?
It would mean a lot for our country. And I say that as somebody who grew up in a rural area, a small town of about 10,000 people, 3 hours south of Kansas City, 2 hours from Wichita. There are many places like my hometown that just don't have the same access that people in bigger cities do. And that over time creates a bunch of problems. It means that farmers can't use technological tools for precision agriculture. That means that doctors can't extend their expertise through telemedicine.
Right.
That means that teachers can't download and students can't upload their homework as quickly. It has all these effects. And over time, it does create a perception in rural America that there are just two different countries here, that we don't have the same rights and potential that everybody else does.
But what does it mean in practice? Does it mean putting more cell phone towers up? Does it mean laying down fiber optic cable? I guess, on a practical level, what does it mean?
It means all of those things. Okay. It means making sure that there's a business case for deploying that infrastructure that's going to connect people. It could be an optical fiber line in parts of Alaska where there's permafrost and you can't lay fiber. It could mean a fixed wireless or satellite connection.
Right.
Could anywhere in the country, it could mean wireless.
So what is government's role in that? Does it require taxpayer investment? Does it require a different regulatory environment? What do we do up here in Congress?
It means both, actually. Those are the two key tools in the toolbox. One is updating our rules so that any company anywhere in the country has a stronger incentive to compete. But we recognize there's some parts of the country that simply will never find a business case for deployment. And there, the SEC has about a $9 billion fund called the Universal Service Fund that we've reformed over the last 2 years under my administration to target unserved parts of the country. So we want to make sure that whether it's a tribal reservation or a rural area that simply hasn't known opportunity, we want to make sure that they have infrastructure as well.
And are we making progress on that?
We are, absolutely. In fact, just yesterday, we announced that we're dedicating about $21 million to connect parts of the Idaho Panhandle and Spokane County. We've done similar announcements around the country. And even though it's not going to make the front pages of the New York Times, and the cable news networks are never going to highlight it, there are thousands more Americans, and I've met some of them, who are getting high-speed access for the first time. And it's hard to overstate what a big difference this makes in the lives of those folks.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we talked about the gig economy before. I think you have a phrase for that. Is it? Wait, I had it written down somewhere. I'm going to look it up. But democratizing.
Oh, the democratization of entrepreneurship.
There we go.
Yeah, it's something I believe a lot in. Is that there's so many good ideas out there, and increasingly in the 21st century, for those ideas to gain expression in the wider economy and society, you've got to have that digital connection. Otherwise, they just wither on the vine. And those have been the most inspiring stories. These entrepreneurs I meet, Chelsea Pickner in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, who started a fashion business, now gets customers from all 50 states and around the world. I mean, those are that is the American dream in the 21st century, but it requires that broadband infrastructure for that dream to find reality. Right,
exactly. I mean, we want the ability to own our own labor, sell our own labor, not having anybody else get in the way. And I think that's a really cool thing, especially if maybe you're outside the norm in some way, or outside the cities in some way. There's not that many job opportunities. You can operate within the gig economy, and it's a pretty amazing deal. You can get your healthcare that way too.
Absolutely right.
What kind of innovations are you seeing in we've mentioned it a few times already, but the telemedicine market?
Yeah, so right now we're in the first stages of the telemedicine, telehealth revolution, which involves essentially getting hospitals broadband connections in order to better serve patients. And so we've seen, for example, at the Cleveland Clinic, they have a mobile stroke unit that because of 4G LTE connections to the hospital, they're able to decrease the amount of time it takes to assess and stabilize a stroke patient by about 26 minutes, which is a huge deal.
Yeah.
I visited some schools that have broadband connections that allow students to get a telehealth visit without parents having to take time off work. But increasingly in the future, healthcare is going to become completely inverted, by which I mean patients will get healthcare outside of the healthcare facility.
Yeah.
It's at their home, at their work, using wireless sensors and things like that. So we started a pilot program to encourage that kind of innovation. So if you're a diabetic and your blood sugar goes down, your healthcare provider could tell you, hey, look, you need to take your medicine. Same thing with heart attack patients. We've seen now that using artificial intelligence and wireless connections, you can really figure out if somebody's at risk for a heart attack well before that MI actually materializes.
Right.
We're just scratching the surface in terms of telemedicine.
And that's good to hear. I think we need to promote that more. I mean, when we talk about the problems with the healthcare market, the problem can actually be focused on one thing, which is price and cost. I mean, we do pay more than other developed countries. And last time I checked, the only thing that has ever driven prices down without hurting the supply of the good or service that we're talking about is the free market. More price or more competition, more choice, and more technological innovation. So,
exactly.
I worry greatly about a lot of proposals that would really effectively disincentivize technological innovation, especially in the healthcare market. Because we see new technologies coming out all the time that really reduce costs, and we have to allow that kind of innovation to happen.
I could agree more. And if I could make a pitch, one of the things that is holding telemedicine back right now is the fact that there's state-by-state licensing of medical professionals. And I consistently hear that from some doctors. I've visited some of these facilities that are doing great work, but they'll say, we can't serve patients just across the border.
Right.
Can you do something about that? And the value is shown in the VA facilities. I've now visited VA facilities from Boise, Idaho to Providence, Rhode Island. And to me, at least, the veterans, especially who are getting mental health consultations through telemedicine, it is a game changer for them because Congress passed a law last year to get rid of that VA system interstate licensing. So if you know anyone in Congress who can pioneer a law like that, let me know. But no, it really makes a difference. I remember in Lecanto, Florida, I met a guy named Gordon who was a Vietnam veteran, and I asked his daughter who took him to this visit, what does it mean to you to be able to have access in this rural community to some of these great mental health experts in the University of Pittsburgh, I think it was. And she said it has added years to his life. And I have to think there's so many other folks out there who could benefit from those services. Yeah,
that's exactly right. And again, I talk about my generation a lot. What do we like to see? And I think ideally we would want our healthcare to be really encompassed on our cell phone. That's what we want. I want to be able to choose my doctor on my phone. I want to look at my, we have direct primary care systems in America. We're looking at ways to emphasize that model a lot more, get it more widespread, because really you're just talking about a flat fee with your doctor. You can engage in telemedicine with that doctor, and you finally have a doctor-patient relationship, and you have choice, and you have price competition. These models are out there. They work. And again, if we're looking at regulating things properly, why not look at what has worked, what has driven costs down while keeping quality high, and build upon that? I'm always so taken aback by the tendency in Washington to throw away what has worked, presume that everything is a disaster, and then completely revolutionize it. And put us on a new path, which inevitably has much more government intervention.
And when that doesn't work, come back with an even more.
We need more power. We need more power.
Right.
We promised to do this for you. The other guys wouldn't let us. But now we need more power to get this done. It's one of the biggest problems with politics is this tendency and this seduction by politicians to just promise more stuff. Right. And then point at the other guy and be like, well, they're not promising anything. They don't really care about you. It's like, no, we actually care about you so much that we're not going to lie to you. And I want to build upon what works. And so that gets into your regulatory principles that you talk about often. I mean, can you expand on those?
Yeah, there are a few of them. One is that, and this goes to your point, that competition in the free market as opposed to preemptive regulation ultimately deliver a lot more value for consumers at the end of the day. It might be more counterintuitive because free coming from the government often seems very appealing. But ultimately, that's
so
not
appealing.
I mean, and the only problem with free over time, as you know, is that it simply costs too much.
It costs people things in the long run. It reduces innovation. And it's the number one. It's the easiest thing in the world for me as a politician to do is to promise you more stuff.
Right. Exactly right. Another principle I try to embrace is just technological neutrality. Going back to our earlier conversation, the FCC should not be in the business of picking winners and losers. We should give everyone a fair chance to compete. And related to that is a third principle, is that our decisions should reflect basic principles of economics, cost-benefit analysis, things like that. And finally, we should be transparent about our work. We want to reform how the agency operates in order to allow people on the street who don't have the ability to come to Washington to hire a lawyer, to lobby us, us. We want them to be able to understand our decisions.
Right.
And
you guys have taken some steps towards transparency at the FCC.
Yeah, recently. For many, many years, the FCC, we were required by law each month to have a meeting that is where we vote, the commissioners vote on different things that are proposed by the chairman. For many years, those votes happened, and only after that, the American people were able to see what the decision was. Mm-hmm. I never understood that. I mean, can you imagine if you introduced a bill and you called for a vote in Congress and only afterward your constituents were able to see what it was you're proposing to do? There'd be a revolution, but we were routinely doing that. And so we changed it. My second week in office, we had a pilot program in which we published these proposed decisions at least 3 weeks before we had these meetings. And we were
told, input.
Yeah, and we were told the sky's going to fall. It's this is a terrible idea, but now everyone loves it. And those are some of the most rewarding comments I get from when I travel around the country. I've been in now 48 states and the territories of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. Many people will say, hey, you know what? I've never been to your office, but I liked actually that proposal you made on suicide prevention or this idea or that idea. I could actually read it on the internet before you voted on it. And I know it's a small thing given the crazy environment we're in, but to build more confidence in our regulatory system, we've got to be more transparent with the American people.
Oh, that makes sense. And but sometimes you're punished for it a little bit, and so like we already talked about the memes, but we'll end with this because we have something in common. We've both been made fun of quite a bit by comedians. Me on Saturday Night Live, of course, but you with John Oliver. So what did John Oliver have to say about a coffee mug, I believe?
Yeah, so he's a big net neutrality advocate and was not the biggest fan of me. And so when we proposed in 2017 to go down the road of deciding to revisit these net neutrality regulations, he singled out the mug I use. It's this giant Reese's mug for those Reese's Peanut Butter Cup fans out there. It holds about 6 liquid cups of coffee. I measured it myself one time. So he said, well, this guy thinks he has a big mug. Check this out. And he came out with this giant, just ridiculously sized mug. So then I came back with a Twitter video myself over the top. We went to Home Depot, got a garbage can, shaved it in half, plastered Reese's on it.
Put some effort into this.
Yeah, no, look, we take our public service very seriously at the FCC. Yeah. And so, but it's kind of funny now. It's become iconic now. So whenever I travel around, people will often ask, did you bring the mug? Did you bring the mug? Yeah. And it's kind of taken on a life of its own. And some of my favorite emails are from the critics who will come in and say, screw you and your mug. And I always think the mug was sort of an innocent bystander in all of this. It had no say in the matter. It had no agency, but somehow it's become this icon of all things FCC and associated with me anyway. So
you still have the mug? Is it in the office?
It's a functional mug. This is not decorative.
This is big. Okay. Yeah,
no, it isn't really. Can. Yeah. So when my then girlfriend, now wife, and I were dating, we went to Hershey, PA, and I got this mug because I love Reese's and I love coffee. And I thought, hey, doesn't get any better than this. And I started drinking it at our monthly meetings when I was a commissioner. And so these meetings can go on for a while. And, I don't know about you, but a lot of regulatory talk over time, your eyes start to glaze over without the caffeine. Yeah, exactly. Right. So it's been a blast. It's I really love the mug, and it's I don't know. It's always kept safe. I don't take it on the road.
Good. I mean, you don't want anyone to steal it. These.
I'm sure there'd be many who'd like to take a cat and whack at it or sell it on eBay or whatever.
Yeah. Geez. Well, I think since there's been so much success after the net neutrality decision. It appears we're on track as Americans to sort of, I think, get off that anger, the angry train of pro net neutrality. Are you seeing that, or do you still get a lot of hate?
I still get a little bit of it, but by and large, a lot of the folks who might still disagree with the decision at least have admitted that the world hasn't ended.
No, it is not.
And so whenever I answer questions about this, I try to reflect something that I think you've really done much better than most, certainly me here in Washington, which is to handle these things with grace and with respect. And I followed you from afar for a while, and you easily could have gone down the same road that would have earned you a ton of clicks and you have people egging you on. But to handle it the way you did, I think reflects, as President Lincoln would have said, the better angels of our nature. And we could use a lot more of that here in Washington.
We could. Well, I mean, you reflect that as well. So, and I appreciate that because we easily could have slammed Saturday Night Live. And I probably wouldn't have been on the show the next weekend if I'd done that. And then we would just be at this kind of standstill and it wouldn't feel very good. And that's the norm, frankly, is to just hit them back, participate in the outrage, don't confront it. Yeah. And I think he did the same thing because it would have been easy to just fact check John Oliver, show him how wrong he is and do it in a way that was, maybe snarky and mean because that's the norm. I mean, that's what people people tend to do. And we tend to win more. And I define winning as persuading people, not just making noise. And so I think we win more if we actually engage in the discussion in a way that's both humanizing, but also gets our point across.
Absolutely. And the SNL is a great example of that. Had you not gone on that show, millions of people who would be predisposed not to like you or your views or whatever would never have seen that side of you, and you wouldn't have been able to make your case in a nuanced way. And so I view it the same way. And when I do these town halls on college campuses or among critics, I want them to see that there's a real thought process that went into this decision. There's a real human that stands behind that decision. These are not easy things to do. These are not easy positions to have. But at the end of the day, our goals are the same, which is to vindicate the public interest. And whether I'm doing it from the FCC or you here in Congress, I'm confident the American people have an open mind and an open heart to folks who approach the table as we do, or try to do anyway, in good faith.
I think so. And on that note, I think we've hit about everything. So Chairman Ajit Pai, thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Anytime.